أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته يا مؤمنين لعنة الله عليه يا منافقين. Let's say salawat as a jamaat one time. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. سبحان الله الحمد لله الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. Okay, so basically today's video is going to be on Daniel Haqeeqatjou, rational doubt, and the dual form of probabilistic reasoning that is required to produce a new Jadid Ilm-e-Kallam, and just to replace that long term, basically the third long term, to replace it, it's basically talking about scientific reasoning and its relationship to the reasoning required to create semantic fields or determine semantic fields of words that are used in the Qur'an, and thereby to actually very precisely and mathematically understand what scientific theories are actually contradicting the Quran, and which ones are only appearing to contradict the Quran, right? So this whole discussion, we'll get into it. And the reason I wanted to do this video is actually I made another video regarding Yasir Qadhi evolution and the word takhliq. And the final 3 minutes of that about 11-minute video, there's a huge spike in people are watching the whole video through. About 33% of people watch the whole video through, but the last third of it, basically people double the watch time. Like, people are rewatching that one third. Almost every single person is rewatching that one third of it, right? And there's like a local spike, and then there's a big spike, and then it kind of falls off, right? So I watched that, and I realized that it was the ideas I was conveying there was the basis of a complete video. So let's dive right into it. Basically, the reason that video is targeted on Yasir Qadhi, but this video I'm going to target at the audience of Daniel Haqeeqatjou. And the reason I'm doing that is because what Daniel is doing is the via Negativa, he's criticizing all these philosophies that exist, and that's a very important thing. That's what I've been doing my whole life, basically, and developing my ability to do that, just criticizing feminism and democracy and whatever philosophy there is, criticizing it. But there's also a via positiva, there's also a positive thing that he is not doing. And the Salafi school, I believe, like the very strict Salafi way of thinking, would not engage in this. But I'm just going to put the idea in front of you, right? Which is this idea of Ilm-e-Kallam, right? The Salafis have never liked Ilm-e-Kallam. Sunnis have always liked Ilm-e-Kallam, the Maturidi and this and that. And there's the Hanbali school, which there's the Maturidi school and the Ash'ari school and all these things, right? I'm not going into the classical debates here. What I'm saying is that there is a need for a positive Jadid Ilm-e-Kallam, a modern Ilm-e-Kallam. So you're going to deconstruct, right? You're going to deconstruct the philosophies that are coming at you. But in order to do that, you're going to learn about those philosophies. And in learning those philosophies, you will learn things which are true. You will learn that there is some core truth to what feminism is saying. There is some core truth to what democracy is saying. There's something in there that's true, on which basis all these other falsities kind of base off of, right? And so when you find this truth, what you have to do is you have to use that to explicate the hikmah of the Quran and the Sunnah itself, to explicate the hikmah of al-Islam, right? You have to use it for that purpose. You have to repurpose the understanding that you found, right? And so in doing this, you produce something which is called the Jadid Ilm-e-Kallam, and what that means is a new systematic theology. But you're not really creating anything new. It's just when you criticize the new philosophies that have come into existence that did not previously exist, and in the face of them, you articulate articulate the Islamic perspective, this is going to be at a level of nuance and litafa that has not previously existed. Do you understand? So that is, we do have to proactively engage in this work of producing a Jadid Ilm-e-Kallam, which is basically uh, articulating the Islamic perspective in a manner that is acceptable to the modern mind, which is rational, right? To make Islam acceptable to a rational minded person, which is, there's nothing wrong with being rational, right? So a biologist has a particularly trained reason. He has a takhassus, right? He has a specially trained reason, and a physicist has a particularly trained reason. And to make Islam acceptable, they're going to have particular doubts from that rationality. They're going to have particular doubts, and so we have to have a tabir of Islam that is acceptable to these people, right? And when we do this, this is actually iqamatuddin, because this is the da'wah um, that is necessary in our time. Now, there's dangers here. So Daniel Haqeeqatjou would immediately raise some dangers here, and I want to reveal that I'm aware of them, and these dangers have historically not been avoided really. So you have I think Ibn Taymiyyah and Imam Ghazali, both of them do this work of rejecting the philosophers, but before they reject them, they understand them. So there's this sort of process that's happened before, but especially Imam Ghazali, what comes out of that is kind of like the Ilm-e-Kalam type of movement, right? Comes out of that. And a lot of the Ilm-e-Kalam, they have all sorts of Greek philosophy and various philosophies of their own time, which is kind of ridiculous, especially if you read Ibn Arabi, who I'm a big fan of. Certain things he's very Quranic, very rational. There's a lot of good in Ibn Arabi, but then there's a lot of things where he accepts like all sorts of ridiculous things, like maybe something, I don't have it clear in my mind right now, but something akin to the world is on the back of a tortoise. Those type of things, you will find them in Ibn Arabi, because he kind of wanted to affirm the truth that he found in Greek philosophy. You understand what I'm saying? Now, so there's this danger where we have this khalis Quran and Sunnah, which is khalis, right? It is pure and tayyib. And by going through this process, we may, in our articulation, adulterate it to some degree. That is possible, and that is a danger that we have to be aware of and avoid, right? But there's also a fundamental difference between the old Ilm-e-Kalam, the people who did this, and the new Ilm-e-Kalam, Jadid Ilm-e-Kalam, because the old Ilm-e-Kalam was responding to philosophy. Our Ilm-e-Kalam, yes, is responding to social scientific philosophy, or philosophy regarding the social sciences like feminism, right? But it is also, the more the Jadid Ilm-e-Kalam I'm more interested is addressing material sciences, right? So it's addressing something that has not only a rational basis but an empirical basis, right? And it's addressing something that has a different form of reasoning. The philosophy of the past was deductive, so there would be axioms they deduce, and then they would reason from that, right? But for us, there is no it's we're reasoning inductively, right? We're reasoning inductively, so it's different. There's vast amounts of data to support a particular theory, or to be explained by a particular theory before that theory gets a lot of grounding, right? So it's not like something that just like philosophically popular. It's something that has a lot of evidence to it, right? There's a lot of evidence to it. So it's a different type of thing. The Jadid Ilm-e-Kalam of the past was something different, and the Ilm-e-Kalam that we knew today is something different, because the nature of the sciences, the nature of the doubt is more rational, it's more empirical, it's more true, it's more valid today, what we're dealing with, right? And also, before, the mythology was like the tortoise. The earth is on the back of a giant tortoise in it's swimming around space or something, right? So you used to have those type of ideas, but today, the distinction between, scientific methodology and scientism, right? Like these two things are fairly distinguishable for a rational person, right? These two things that, you can distinguish the worship of Richard Dawkins from engaging in biological science, right? These two things are fairly distinguishable today, right? Maybe not for all people, but for a learned person, they're pretty pretty clear. So we need to produce this new positive Jadid Ilm-e-Kallam. Now, how do we do that? Now I've tried to give a nuanced kind of perspective on what we have to do, why we should do it, why we shouldn't do it, what we should be careful of, what dangers we should be aware of. But now I want to make a little bit about the type of reasoning, the type of dual reasoning that is required in order to do this, right? The type of dual probabilistic reasoning that's required to do this. So first off is actually, in order to do this in a Quranic manner, we have to determine the semantic field of particular trilateral roots that are used in the Quran. So khalaqa is an important one. Kha, lam, qaf. This is an important trilateral root that is used in the Quran. We have to precisely understand the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses this trilateral root in the Quran, and what type of utilization occurs at what particular point. And what we'll find is that there's a core kind of utilization. There's a very core way which this word or this trilateral root is used to make meaning. It is utilized for a particular meaning over and over and over again. And then you have these outlier occurrences, right? You have these outlier occurrences. So once might be a metaphorical extension from the core meaning to some kind of meaning that makes sense, but as a secondary or a tertiary meaning, right? Or you might have four or five that go in the same direction, two that go in a different direction, one that's over here, etc. So you determine the semantic field, the core semantic field, and then kind of the outlying semantic fields of that particular trilateral root. And what that gives you, it gives you a clear sense of what this when this trilateral root is used, what it means for certain, what is the core idea of the semantic field, and what it can possibly mean in particular moments. Now once you have that, and then you study nagh and grammar, and you know how things are interrelated, and a little bit of balagha and rhetoric, and you know how things are interrelated across multiple ayat, right? You start to understand that, then you can like very clearly determine the meaning, not interpret the Quran. We don't interpret the Quran. Tahwil means disclosure or determination, or also discovery, or almost like a re-revelation. Right? So when we seek hidayat from the Quran, hidayat is metaphysical and existential. It is not something only of the aql and the intellect, right? So it is metaphysical, it is existential. Allah has made intikhab or divine appointment of the Quran as the source of guidance. And so when we seek guidance, there's a metaphysical activity from the Quran. There's a metaphysical activity that happens, right? So once we have this clear sense of what the meaning of the book is, right, very precisely, very mathematically determined, very rigorous and clear arguments, right, then we put that to one side and we engage in a different form of probabilistic reasoning, which is also probabilistic, right? And we look at scientific theory, and we look at all the evidence there is for that scientific theory, and we looked at the core of that scientific theory. There is some substance, there's some mada, and that substance of the theory is very well supported, right? Like that core of the theory is extremely well supported based upon all the evidence we have and all the experiments we've run. That substance of the theory is very unlikely to be falsifiable, is very likely to be falsifiable. And then we have to discover it's a very similar process. You see, we have to determine that based upon this core substance, you have these other sub-theories, subordinate theories, partial theories in particular sub-domains of the broader theory. You have these particular hypotheses, and you have to kind of reason that based upon the evidence, how far out are these hypotheses, how far out are these sub theories, and if there's a contradiction between a very kind of a not a well supported extension of the theory in one direction and a very well supported substance of the Quranic meaning in one place, then you have to look, you have to see like, oh, this is very unlikely to be true even on the on the scientific level, and it's almost definitely false based upon the Quran, right? Do you understand? So there's this dual reasoning going on. And then you look at something that is very substantially true. There's a lot of evidence. It's not that far extended out from the core of the scientific theory, and it's within the scientific, like it's very certain. If the theory is true as a whole in its core substance, then this hypothesis is very likely to be true because it's not a far out extension by logical reason. It's just kind of like a natural immediate conclusion given the theory. And then you look at something where the Quranic consensus may be on it, but the mathematical determination of the core meaning, this kind of usage of takhliq or whatever, is kind of like a very far out interpretation or a very far out meaning that is likely not to be true based upon even just Quranic reasoning purely. It's likely not to be true, and it's contradicting basically an empirical theory, which means it's contradicting our senses and our aql, which have been given to us by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So if there's some sort of contradiction between the tradition, but a tradition of interpretation which is unlikely to be true anyways, between through a scientific rigorous principled approach of constructing the Quran, and then here you have a scientific thing that is very certain, then we have to question the tradition. So there is a point where we have to question the tradition, right? But what we should be looking for, and what we will likely find most of the time, as a moment, you have to believe this is what we're certainly going to find, is that most of the time, the core substance of the Quranic meaning and the core substance of a scientific theory will often reinforce each other, and will reinforce each other. And when we see that pattern of reinforcement over time, there's actually an ayat of the Quran that really articulates this idea directly, and I'll make a video on that ayah in the future. But like, we will show them our signs in themselves and on the horizons, or something like that. And so what we should look for is this pattern of affirmation, this pattern of mutually reinforced construction, where they're leading us to the similar conclusions. And if we can keep track of that over time, right, we can keep track of that over time, that is also a basis of dawah, right? If that is happening, that is a basis of dawah. And that takes us back to kind of the 1990s, the Quran, the Bible, and science, and all those type of books that were coming out at the time. Anyways, that's the video I wanted to make, and I will talk to you soon. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Please like, please subscribe, please share. Jazakallah khairan.